John from Ripewave Audio with a Why to Buy series video, and this time it's with the Arcam products. If you've been following this series that was introduced last time with Athem, we talked about how these two brands are often looked at by those who are considering an AV receiver or processor, but want something a little different than mainstream brands like Denon, Marantz, Yamaha, Sony, Onkyo, Pioneer, and Integra. They set their sights on Athem and Arcam. And the feeling is that they're going to get a little better sound quality and a little more performance out of these units. Often said that Arcam have high quality amplifiers in them. And we did bring in all these brands, so we have a sense now within Ripewave Audio how these all compare and why somebody would home in on the Arcam brand. And this is what we're going to cover today. Now, this series of products, this was introduced in 2022, and we were here at Ripewave Audio with our video that gave an overview of the time. The 22 introduction was really a refresh of the prior range of products, just adding in the HDMI 2.1 capabilities. So the models that we have today, the AV41, the AVR31, 21, 11, and also the AVR5 are really just those prior models, the 40, the 30, the 20, 11, etc. With the HDMI capabilities. These products look largely the same with that refresh. So the basic design on these products, and I think also the electronics inside them, aside from the video section, is pretty much the same as the prior generation. But this is when we jumped in, when they introduced that 8K version. And then in 2023, we came out with a video that covered the AV41. This was towards the end of the year, only a few months ago, and we invite you to take a look at those videos because they go into a lot more detail than we are going to today. And this video here is really just focused on who might be interested in this unit. And when we had that AV41 in-house, that processor, we did a comparison with Monoprice's HTP1 and the Emotiva RMC1. Of course, you know that we've had that in-house for a long time. That's our reference processor. And of course, there's things we like about that and things we don't. But that is just setting a baseline for us in-house. And we look at this series, the prices range with the introductory unit, which is a receiver, the AVR5 at $2,000, all the way up to the AVR31, which is $6,900. Of course, you might get it at discount. And if you're not in the United States, the pricing might be a little different. But mixed in with all those receivers is the AV41, which is a processor only. And that is somewhere between the AVR21 and AVR31 in price at $5,250. So let's take a look at these units. And here we're looking at the processor, the AV41, next to their flagship receiver, the AVR31. So not only do these look like the prior generation, but within the family, they all look the same. In a lot of cases, you just have to look at that badge on there to see which model you have. And that's on, when you're looking at the front of this, this is on the bottom left-hand side in that silver badge. And look carefully, and it has the model number there. But the buttons are all in the same place, the same display on these units. Of course, you turn these things around onto the back, and you can tell which one's the receiver and which one's the processor. Naturally, the processor is the one with the balanced outputs, which is nice that they have that on these units for the processor to get balanced outputs. But they also have the unbalanced available for them. And then on the AVR31, as well as the other receivers, you can see no balanced outputs, but instead the binding posts for the 7 channels of amplification. And all the receivers have 7 channels of amplification, regardless of the model, but the power output ratings are different. And you'll see the same remote on all of these products, same remote as they used in the prior generation of products. So if we look at the full lineup, the only processor they're putting out today is the AV41, and introduced in 2022 with the rest of the models, 16 channels of processing. And this is what we'll see in the higher end receivers as well. And then we look at the receiver line. There are 4 separate models of receivers. Looking at the 31 and the 21, they both have 16 channels of processing, but the 11 brings that down to 14. You lose 2 channels of processing. And then with the AVR5, that's 12 channels of processing. So if you're only going to have a more modest speaker layout, and some rooms can only accommodate so many speakers, so you may be just fine with the AVR5 or 11, depending on your layouts. But moving up in the lineup, you're also going to get a little better output on the amplifiers. We can see here the flagship, the 31, with 2 channels driven, a rated 140 watts, and with all channels driven 100 watts. Moving down to the 21, that's 125 watts, 2 channels driven, 95 watts, all channels driven. The AVR 11 and 5 are rated the same at 85 watts, 2 channels driven, 60 watts, all channels driven. So select not just by your speaker layout, but how much power you want to put out to your speakers there. Of course, you could start with the internal amplifiers, and they all have pre-outs, so if you wanted to use external amplifiers, you always can. We can see the consistency, particularly with this picture, regardless of the price range. These all look the same number of buttons and UI on the front, but you can see on the back how they start to depopulate some of the things, particularly when you get to AVR 11 and 5, where you don't have the extra auxiliary outputs on those units. Looking inside these models, the Arcam products, whether you're talking about the receiver or the processor, have a toroidal power supply. So not something you see in a lot of models, different brands. Of course, the Athem does have toroidal power supplies as well. And it's the same layout of boards. And of course, the receiver models have, you can see in there, the capacitors and the heat sink for your amplifiers. So that empty space that you see in the processor is filled in with amplifiers when you go to the receiver models. But otherwise, really the same layout. So that's a quick overview of the models that Arcam has in this portfolio. Now let's take a look at why somebody might choose an Arcam processor receiver. And we're going to start with sound quality, because that's the #1 reason that we always hear why somebody is moving to an Arcam product versus some other more common brand. And that is sound quality. Now, when we did our in-house testing, we tested all these brands that you see on the slide. We found that the Arcam, and we had the AV41 in-house, sat in the top tier of products. And if you've been following along, while we do show a little bit of improvement on some brands over another in a particular tier, that difference is really small and maybe come down to real subjective listening. We do think that the differences between tiers in products, from the green being the top tier, the blue, the second tier, and the yellow-orange in the third tier, you can really hear the difference. Within a tier, those differences are small, and it may come down to your speakers and your room characteristics and how you run your calibration and have everything tuned and set up. And that could make one unit sound better than the other. So I think if you aim for any of the receivers and processors within the top tier, you're going to get a very similar experience, and you should focus on other features and other capabilities that are going to really make it right for you. And of course, price is a factor, and some of these are more expensive than others. So Arcam is showing as #5 on this list, but depending on who you are, as I said, you might place that higher or lower. But I think you'll find it's usually in the same tier. Of course, if you disagree, we'd love to hear from you. We're always learning from the audience here. Along with the sound quality, and one of the factors that can influence the sound quality is the DACs that are used internal to these units. And whether you're dealing with the entry-level AVR5 or the AV41 and the AVR31, they all use the same DACs, and these are the ESS9026 Pro chips that are in these Arcam products, and they put out on their literature the same specifications, that 93 dB signal to noise minus 100% on THD, and the 192 PCM capabilities. One thing that we pointed out in earlier videos, and we'll do so again here, is there's no documentation on the DSD support, although DSD support is built into the Arcam. We just had to find out once we got the unit, put in a DSD Super Audio CD, and found out it does work, and it does show on the display that does have that capability. But something they don't advertise. What's really interesting, we pointed this out in earlier videos too, is the chips that the Arcam use. ESS gives some of the highest specifications on those, but then when you look at the published specifications from Arcam, it's one of the lowest. So I don't know where the truth really is here, but the more important number is really what it outputs, not what the chip capability is. But it is a very good chip that's in all of these Arcam products, and I think that attributes to why a lot feel that the sound quality does make this one of the units to go to. As far as speaker layouts and formats that the Arcam units support, now other than the AVR5 and 11, they all support a 7.5.4 to a 9.1.6, depending on how you want the subwoofers configured. The fact that it can take as many as 5 subwoofers puts it in a unique class. Only the Monoprice HTP1 we found was able to take up to 5 subwoofers. Internally put that out and handle those independently, versus the Marantz would be the next tier down, where it has 4 with its new cinema range, as well as some of the Denon products. Of course, Athem has that with the AVM90 for subwoofers, but to support 5, that is quite unique. So if you happen to be one of the few enthusiasts with 5 subwoofers, you can do it with this model. The rest of us, 4 is usually the max out by you put a subwoofer in each corner and you're perfectly happy. But it's nice that it can take 5. Of course, the more subwoofers you put in, the less of the other speakers that you can use, whether they're at the ear level or height channels, and so that will take it away. So you might, instead of having 3 rows of heights, have to go down to 2 rows of heights because you're using more subwoofers, or you're using front wide channels in some cases. So that's your trade-off. But we like that it can do up to a 9.1.6 on the configuration of your Arcam units. The sound formats, just like a lot we see, the base seems to be every receiver and processor has Dolby Atmos, has DTS-X. That's kind of the baseline for all of these. But it's whether it supports DTS-X Pro and Aural 3D. And with the Arcam, it's Aural 3D that it supports, but not DTS-X Pro at this point, which means that if you're going to use it for upmixing and you have front wide speakers, you're really not being able to do so with your upmixing the same way that you would get from, let's say, a Cinema 30 from Marantz that has the DTS-X Pro capabilities. It does have a AM/FM tuner built in and an 1/8-inch headphone jack, so you can utilize those. And you can switch the power between voltages, 110 to 220, from the back of this. So you could take this internationally and it will work without having to get a factory-specific model. And I know some of you might travel to different countries as you change jobs in your career, and you'd be glad that you could take this with you. This full range also has support for IMAX and Enhanced, Dolby Vision, and it has Dirac Live calibration in it and support for bass control. More on that later. It doesn't have THX certification as with an Onkyo or an Integra product. They're the only ones in the world that have it today. Let's talk about the user interfaces. What strikes you right away when you look at an Arcam product, as well as an Athem, is the big, large front display. And this has been a criticism of some of these other models out there that are still sticking to a two-line style LCD matrix. With these, you get a nice big display that you can see from across the room if it happens to be in your theater and you can see it. Of course, if you're sticking this in a rack behind the wall or in a closet, that may not matter so much for you. But we do like these big displays, and I think it's a great move by Arcam, as well as Athem and Monoprice, that have gone to these more modern large displays. So great job on doing that. They also have a web configuration, but don't expect to find it in the documentation because there's no documentation on this. We stumbled upon it by putting the IP address of the AV41 into a browser, and it came up. Of course, it gave this real technical view to start with, and we had to then go in and look at the other menu choices. And when you get into that, you do get a little better web interface there, but I think they need to do some work on this. And you can see here one of the screens for setting up the speakers, and you have some choices. Be careful that you should always add things in pairs on channels 13 through 16 on those models that have those extra auxiliary outputs. And if you don't have it as a pair, like on your subwoofers, then Dirac is going to have some trouble with those. So be careful on how you do. If you have an odd number of subwoofers, be sure to configure that subwoofer output there first. So what we do find as the configuration of the Arcam products is a bit challenging. So not only do they not have documentation on the web interfaces, they don't put a lot of documentation together on the speaker layouts. They don't tell you which speaker layouts you can configure. So I would recommend that the person doing the setup for your Arcam is an experienced person. This is not for a novice just getting into home theater. They're going to need some help, and it's not in the manual. Of course, if you listen to our videos, that might help you if this is your first time around. So I invite you to go take a look at those. If you have bought an Arcam, that might help you get through where the manual does not cover it. And here's another case in that point, that when you go in and take a look at the speaker distances, for example, it shows channels 13 through 16, but it doesn't give you the label and what you map that to. So if you mapped it to a subwoofer or to front wide speakers, it's not going to show you that. So you have to know that your channel 13 was subwoofer 2 and 14 was subwoofer 3, and 15 and 16 were your front wides. It's not intuitive. And so this is where I think if you're not technical, you might struggle a bit with this. Of course, if you're not technical, you're probably not looking at speaker distances anyways, but then there's some of us that are somewhere in between being ultra technical and fearful of technology. So just keep that in mind. Here's another miss, I believe, on the user interface. When you look at the front display of an Arcam, it gives you the channel count along with other information. And we always like seeing this, what is the listening format? What sampling rate is it at? And the channel count, as we're talking about here. The way they represent channel count, I think, is a bit confusing. And if you go to the manual, they do talk about how they do this in the manual. The first number, the X number, represents the front channels, left, right, and center. So that could be mono 1, stereo 2, or if you have a center speaker in the mix, then that's a 3. Okay. The Y number represents the number of surrounds, side surrounds, rear surrounds, and the Z number represents the low frequency effects. So you could have a 3/4-1, which would be 7 main speakers and 1 low frequency. We would just say that's a 7.1 setup. So I think this is a bit odd. I think they're the only ones that do it this way, and I really wish they would use something more conventional. They do have a mobile app, and I think some of you are really embracing the use of mobile apps instead of using, let's say, the remote control. I think in some cases this is nice because if you don't want to be distracting somebody that is watching a movie with you, when you push the button, you see these on-screen display items pop up. But if you're using a mobile app, you can make some adjustments, maybe change the sound mode or adjust a trim just with the mobile app without disturbing the people that are watching the movie. And what we see with Arcam, and this app is really a replication of their remote. And it's showing you some of the stuff that you would see on screen or in the front panel on this unit. But speaking of on-screen, the on-screen display on an Arcam is only 2 lines, even if you're doing configuration. So I don't recommend configuration using the on-screen display. I would use that web page or the front panel of the Arcam unit. So not quite as elegant as we've seen on other products where that on-screen display can take over the whole screen when you're doing configuration. And even when you're trying to see the sound modes and everything, it's pretty limited information on that on-screen display. So I think having the mobile app brings that a little closer to you. And if the unit is behind the walls, you'll see a lot more detail on the mobile app. It's just really a remote. It doesn't get into a lot of details beyond what you can see on other interfaces. The other thing that we liked about the Arcam is its support for Oral 3D, and you can configure up to a 13.1 layout. If you know Oral 3D, there's different speaker layouts, 9.1, 10.1, etc., up to 13.1. So this has it, and the reason why it has it, it does support a height center channel and a top surround channel, which not all Oral 3D implementations do. For example, the Monoprice didn't have those options. So that's good. And then depending on, let's say, which Marantz model you have, you may or may not have that capability. So some of the higher end models do have that as well. So just keep that in mind. If you want to do the full Oral 3D layouts, the Arcam has it. It does have support for streaming built into it. Not as much as some models, but it does have quite a few in here. So Apple AirPlay, Chromecast, Spotify, Tidal with MQA, which what we don't see a lot of. I think NAD is one of the few other brands that supports MQA. If you're looking for MQA support, this could be a reason why you use an Arcam product. And it's also Roon ready. It does have integration support. Again, it doesn't claim as many integrations as other brands, but this is pretty good with Control 4, Creston, Elan, and URC, all mentioned in their literature. Of course, it probably supports more, but this is just what they report in their literature. On to the room calibration. When you buy an Arcam product that's a receiver processor, it does include Dirac, and it does include a calibration mic, although this is a little low quality plastic-like mic, and you can see this pictured here that is included with it. Many of those who buy an Arcam that is serious about calibration will upgrade the mic to something like a UMIC 1, spend about $100 to get that and have a better quality microphone. But you do have this one that comes with it to get you going, and it will support measurements of 9, 13, and 17 positions, and it will store up to 3 different filters on the unit. Now, this is a little less than others that we've seen. Usually there's 2 slots of 3, so you can have up to 6 filters in, let's say, a Denon, Marantz, Emotiva, etc., that support Dirac. So this is a little less on the memory that you can have for your Dirac filters. Of course, the Monoprice HTP1 supports the most. You do have the option to buy the bass control option for Dirac with this, so $350 for single and multi-channel bass control at $500. But if you look now, they are running a discount, 25% off on the Dirac Live license, and this is good through October 31st of 2024, and so you could take advantage of this promotion if you haven't already. I also state that this can be run from a computer. In fact, it only runs from a computer. So you must have a laptop or Windows or a Macintosh computer that you can run your Dirac from, unlike an Onkyo where you have the option of running Dirac from the unit. In summary, we'll take a look at this comparison table we did with Monoprice and Emotiva, but really focusing on the Arcam line. And we mentioned a lot of these already about the documentation really not being that great. So I would recommend this for somebody that really knows their way around an AV processor or receiver. If you do buy this, you will get good sound quality. Although we did have some issues with pops at startup and input changes. I'm not sure everybody gets that. Just the unit we had that experience, because we do see a lot of people raving about the sound quality and not talking about these pops that we heard. And we had upgraded the firmware to what was available. This was around November, December timeframe of last year. So not too long ago. And we felt like there was some quirks in the layouts and everything like that. But if you can get around that, and I think once you learn, the remote, some of the buttons on the remote are not really intuitive, the way they're labeled, etc. But if you get this muscle memory and you know where to push, after having it a few weeks, you might quite understand it and really enjoy this unit for its sound quality. But keep in mind, I think at this time, some of the other brands have caught up on the sound quality, including Denon Marantz, if you buy them some of the higher end models, and you can still save a little money over what the Arcam sells for. That really sums up our impressions of this Arcam portfolio. What are your thoughts? Do the points that we made here and what would make the Arcam portfolio attractive to a potential buyer, does that ring true? Do some of the limitations and quirks that we've mentioned also ring true, or did I have something wrong? That feedback would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. For those who are trying to decide between an Athem and an Arcam product, I will leave you with this. While the sound quality both fits in the top tier, there are functional differences between these two products, the sound formats it supports, the room correction it uses, etc., that I think that depending on what your criteria is, what you want to have in your system for capabilities, once you know that, you will clearly be able to pick Arcam versus Athem. But you also may decide, hey, I can also get another brand, and maybe that's going to be your decision. Make your decision on all these criteria, not just sound quality, but the features and the price. And I think with that done, you're going to land on the right processor or receiver that is for you and your theater. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to take your involvement to the next level, we do have our Patreon channel at www.patreon.com/Ripewave. Of course, you can hit that thanks button and give us a one-time donation. That's always appreciated. It helps us to deliver more content on this channel. And you can always hit that bell notification so you're informed when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.